All right, it's recording.
Hopefully the meeting is still going. Yes.
Yep, and it says I'm a host now.
Excellent. So if we need to do that every week, I can certainly.
Well, I'll have Rob check, because I thought he thought he'd gotten it set up for me. So.
Oh, goodness.
You're welcome. So, where is your podcast going to be? Is it going to have a place? Yeah, you're going to do a podcast.
Trying to remember, they asked online for feedback, and I'm looking back to the last class, and the wireless, the AVG, and I don't remember if I had to know the difference in different.
Oh, the ABGN.
Yeah, for wire, for 802.11, I don't remember if I had to know, I know I studied it, like, insanely, but I don't remember if I had to know it.
So the easiest part is still good to know.
Yeah, but no, like, you need to know the modulation and,
Oh,
like, yeah, like, that's the stuff I studied, like, I went very in-depth, probably far more than I needed to, but I don't remember if I had that on the test or not.
So they get
Hey. All right, guys. Hello. How's everybody?
Here, your slide, right?
Right here, man, on the magic flash drive that's infected with
Like, I didn't
the
leave it.
Locky. Got it on the
I
Locky.
remember if you gave it to me.
I got it on the Locky flash drive.
Huh? Yes, it's on.
Well, because.
Yeah, they're muted now.
Oh yeah, he wasn't here.
Yeah, that's really
That's
tough.
what's on that. I am the glue that holds us together.
Absolutely.
Right.
You are, did you, I suppose you didn't see, because there was
No.
a couple of the last 2 weeks, I was trying to listen at home, and it was just so frustrating, and people were saying, oh my God, we're so missing Rob, oh my God.
No.
Yeah,
Yeah, Rob.
Rob's been out, and then I was daddy. I had full daddy duty the last 2 classes.
Yeah, because well, I was here last week, so he was covering the
Yeah.
things online, but it is really hard to, we need to be in class.
You seen it?
Hmm?
Yeah, you see it?
Yep. Yeah.
On
yeah.
that thing? Hey, new faces. Oh, this is cool. I like new faces.
People are getting frustrated with being online.
Fresh blood. Well, we got the online thing figured out. We did the best we could. Matt did a fantastic job. He was studenting and
teaching.
and whatever you were doing. You did a good job for the last couple classes. Hey, stranger, how you doing? Good to see you.
I couldn't follow along online.
Yeah, I heard about a lot of people talking online
The
last.
lack of muting.
Oh, I wasn't one of those. So.
Okay. Okay.
Were you listening when the lady was yelling at the kid?
Yeah.
Oh, that's.
It was entertaining. Well, yeah, and then I mute them, and then they'd unmute their mics.
Come on, we don't want to hear it.
That was probably my favorite.
See what we missed when. No, I'm muted.
Yeah, I muted everyone and I checked allow them to unmute themselves.
Awesome. Well, here we are, class number 10. It seems like we've only been here.
Oh, you got camera?
Oh, you want to see my face?
They're asking to see you.
No, I guess that's what we do nowadays.
Yeah, thank you.
How do I turn on my camera, man?
Oh, I guess I should turn mine on too.
Oh, you do your camera too?
Figure.
So we're all.
Let them know I'm actually.
I don't know. I'll start video. There's a button that says start video. I should do that one, as you're saying.
There you are.
Okay, started the video. Hey, a lot of new, I mean, not new, but old faces back. That's pretty cool. I like that. Hey, I thought when I left Tuesday, I said something that I regretted later. I was thinking, well, because I said Dell Secure Works sucks. And I was like, no, that's not true. No, because it wasn't true, right? I mean, every organization has certain things, and that, so I wanted to apologize for that. Now it's public, everybody's hearing it, so I shouldn't jump to things like that. Well, it's just, it's bad taste to do stuff like that, to rip on competition and things, we'll just, yeah. So, no, I was saying, so this is class 10. We were just talking, me, you, and you, how it doesn't even seem like it's been 10 classes already. You know what I mean? We're almost done with this thing. We've got Tuesday, Thursday next week, and then the last Tuesday. And we might extend one more just to do it. We can just do practice tests together if you guys want to. We'll make that maybe just optional, but we're through the content, I think, by next Thursday, the Tuesday after this next Tuesday. So only 3 more classes after this one, which is pretty sweet, I think. Been through a lot of content. I don't think too much of it's been too challenging, just a lot of memorization.
There's a large agreement for online for doing a practice test.
Practice test? Okay, good. That'll be fun. So we'll do that. Let's just consider that something we'll do. That would be then May 11th.
Yeah, that Thursday.
Yeah. Okay. So this is what we did last week or Tuesday. We talked about some network scanning tools, you know, the different types of scans that we run, some secure communications things, wireless local area networks. You're going out on a wireless security assessment tomorrow for a client. And yeah, so it's pretty cool. Remote access, and we finished all of that domain. We then got into domain 5, identity and access management. We talked about those cornerstone access control concepts, which we've talked about, you know, numerous times. And it's kind of good that I'm not taking the test anymore because I have a crappy memory. So you guys have to memorize all this stuff. If I had to, I'd be like, whatever. So, you know, it's good. I don't know. It's probably, I don't think it's an age thing either. I think it's just a Evan thing. So access control models, authentication methods, type 1, type 2, type 3. We talked about, you know, the type 3 that will be on the exam, crossover error rate and the false reject rate and the false accept rate and all that good stuff. Single sign-on, we started in on the path of single sign-on, and we're going to pick up from there. But first, we're going to do a quiz. So this was back from domain 4, the technical stuff. Which protocol should be used for an audio streaming server where loss is acceptable? So one of these doesn't have really, that's connectionless, right? That would be UDP. IP would be used on all of them. ICMP probably wouldn't be, well, it'd be used for messaging if we had some issues. TCP is connection oriented, overhead, all that kind of stuff. We don't need that. We need UDP on this one. That's easy. What network topology uses fixed length cells to carry data? ArcNet, ATM, Ethernet, or FDDI, fiber distributed data interface? B, correct. B, ATM. Secure shell, servers listen on what port and protocol? This one's easy. TCP port 22, 20 and 21 are both FTP. One's control, one's data. Now we're all using, you know, passive FTP, so it's all just 21 now. And then TCP 23 is Telnet. So what network cable type can transmit the most data at the longest distance? Coax, fiber optic, or shielded twisted pair, unshielded twisted pair? Fiber, yeah.
I don't remember any questions that easy.
I know, this is easy. Yeah, that's why the practice exam will be fun. I'm hoping that it'll be representative of what we see on the exam. Which device operator operates at layer 2 of the OSI model? Hubs operate at layer 1, firewalls can operate on all 7 layers, switches operate at layer 2, routers operate at layer 3, so our answer here is C. What are the names of the OSI model layers in order from top to bottom? So, you know, when you look at this, you know, physical and application, we know that those are the bookends, but the problem is all A, B, C, and D have those as bookends, so we have to look a little deeper. So it's physical, data link, network. If you go that way, I always go the other way. Application, presentation, session, transport, network, data link, physical. So I don't know which one that is. C, good. Which of the following authentication protocols uses a 3-way authentication handshake? Challenge handshake authentication protocol, so it's actually in the name. That's the answer. B is extensible authentication protocol, Kerberos, or password authentication protocol. The right answer is A here. And we'll go over CHAP again today because that actually shows up again. Restricting Bluetooth network discovery relies on the secrecy of what? The MAC address, symmetric key, private key, public key. Every time you connect to your Bluetooth, you know, like in your car, you're using a secret key, right? A symmetric key. So B is the right answer here. Which network security protocol is also known as RSN, Robust Security Network, and implements the full 802.11i standard? This would be WPA2, right? AES could run in WPA2. WPA is the interim one, and WEP is the old 802.11 standard. What's the difference between stateful firewall and proxy firewall? Stateful firewalls have state. That makes sense. Proxy firewalls do not. That's not true, right? Proxy firewalls terminate sessions and act on behalf of the client and the server. So proxy firewalls have state. Stateful firewalls do not. That's incorrect. Stateful firewalls terminate connections. Proxy firewalls do not. That's incorrect. Proxy firewalls actually terminate the connections, and stateful does not. So D, right? Here we go. Say what? High-level data link control and synchronous data link. I don't remember any of that. It's because nobody uses it. But which transmission mode is supported by both HDLC and SDLC? There's only one that's. There is no. Which one is there none of? I don't think there's a normal balanced mode. But NRM is the right answer. So that would be just a memorization thing. In real life, you're never going to use it.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen it.
So what is the most secure type of EAP, extensible authentication protocol? EAP, TLS, EAL. I guess that might have supposed to have been EAP, TLLS. LEAP or PEEP? Which one? A? Why? No, that's also true. There's T. Right. That's a full typo there. But the reason why that one's the most secure is that's the only one that has client and server authentication. Right. It's also a lot of overhead. We have to implement PKI and all that stuff. That's the one, but it is the most secure. So it's true. But I think what makes it the most secure is there's authentication both ways, right? The client authenticates to the server and the server also authenticates to the client because they both have certificates in that implementation. So what WAN protocol has no error recovery relying on higher level protocols to do reliability? Well, we know for sure X.25 is like super error correction because it was used on really unreliable networks back then. So is it SDMS, frame relay, or ATM? The actual answer here is frame relay. Frame relay doesn't have any error recovery built into it. So B. What is the most secure type of firewall? Packet filter, stateful firewall, circuit level proxy, or application level layer proxy? D, application layer, because that operates through all 7, including being able to read into the data. Circuit levels, layer 5. So the higher level up, the more data we'll be able to see, which makes it more secure. Accessing an IP version 6 network via an IP version 4 network is called what? CIDR, that's classless interdomain routing. That's not right. NAT is network address translation. That's not right. Translation ain't right. Tunneling is the right answer. D. We also don't normally do that unless you're maybe a university or some kind of a research place or maybe government or an ISP. All right, that's it. Quiz. We all scored really well on that, except for the HDLC one, which I would have, if I already obviously saw the questions because I put them in the slides, but that would have been probably the only one that I would have guessed on, to be honest with you. I would have been like, no, crap, I don't know. So NRM is that one. So we left off on Tuesday talking about single sign-on, and we actually saw these slides on Tuesday too. We talked about IBM's take on at least this guy, or IBM, the IBM article, why we would implement single sign-on. Certainly improved user productivity. I don't have to log into each system. The systems are integrated. It's one username and password for, or that's the authentication. Username and password, one username and password for everything, which certainly makes it faster and better productivity. Improved developer productivity, I suppose. Developers can write to a single framework, right? Integrate. They don't have to write all the routines necessarily for authentication. They can just tie into maybe an API for the central, the single sign-on solution. And simplified administration as an admin. I only have to terminate users, change users, provision users in one location. So those are the advantages. Obviously, they're good advantages. Some of the disadvantages, these all seem to make common sense. Difficult to retrofit. Some systems don't play well with other systems. Some systems are proprietary. Some systems are older, legacy. They don't even, they were written before single sign-on was even a thing. So, they can be difficult to get them all to work together. Unattended desktop, obviously that's a risk kind of everywhere, but single sign-on is sort of compounded, because not only do I have access to this one thing, I have access to everything, which is kind of the last one too. It's a single point of attack. So if an attacker can get one set of credentials, potentially they can access everything in the environment. So those are the disadvantages of single sign-on. Access provisioning lifecycle. Now this stuff is really, really basic and easy to understand, but in real life, it's broken all the time, everywhere, right? People don't do provisioning. Well, sometimes they do provisioning maybe well, but they don't do changes usually well at all. Terminations, they don't handle necessarily well. And certainly reconciliation, looking through user accounts. And there's lots of stories of, did I share with the group the one story where, just recent, where it was a guy who was working at some university, was an admin, an IT guy, and created an unauthorized user account. Let's just say it was in Active Directory, and then quit his job, and then used that account to continually access the systems over 700 times. So he just kept coming back and doing whatever he wanted. And those stories are not uncommon. Those stories are very common. We don't read about them much in the news because who's gonna admit it, right? I mean, if there's no regulatory requirement for me to disclose the breach, and why? So that stuff happens a lot. That's a really common thing. And the fix for that would be to audit your user provisioning lifecycle, or your your user accounts. Go through Active Directory every so often, and the amount of time, the frequency for doing user account audits should be somewhat relational to your turnover in the company, right? So if you're a company that has a lot of turnover, you should be doing those types of account reconciliations or audits more often than a company that doesn't have much turnover, right? So it's a big risk for people, and people don't seem to be able to get it nailed down. But after an access control model is chosen, so I've chosen whether I'm doing mandatory access control, non-discretionary access control / rule-based access control, or mandatory access control. Once I've chosen my access control model, then identify or create your provisioning lifecycle. What are the processes that we're going to follow to enable all these things to happen? So this is just an example. This isn't, I don't actually even like this one, but it's an example, right? You've got the creation of the user account, the provisioning of the user account, you enable the user account, and then the exit. But here, in this lifecycle, there's nothing about changes, user account, position changes or things like that. And I've shared with you before, some of the clients that I've worked with, where they try to reconcile privileges, so like somebody changes jobs, and what they do is they say, well, this is what the user used to have access to. This is what the user should have access to. So let's just reconcile the two. Or a better, user change process would be to deprovision the user altogether, and then reprovision the user with the new rights and privileges. That's the right way to do it. But, again, we run into that all the time. So identity lifecycle provisioning, maintenance, passwords, rights, privileges, changes, deprovisioning, reprovisioning, reconciliation, audit, all those things should be part of your lifecycle. Yeah, and formalize this. Here's the lifecycle rules from IBM, password policy compliance checking. Notifying users to change their passwords before they expire. This seems sort of myopic to me. I mean, it's kind of narrow, but anyway, because there's lots of stuff that go under beyond just what we see here. So identifying lifecycle changes such as accounts that are inactive for more than 30 consecutive days. You guys check your user accounts to see who hasn't logged in the last 30 days. And that's a good best practice, right? Because if you haven't logged in the last 30 days, either you ain't doing nothing here, so maybe you should be terminated, or you've been terminated and we missed it, or you're on extended leave, now we've missed it. All those are reasons, reasons why we want to have that account disabled. Identifying new accounts have not been used for more than 10 days. It's not uncommon for HR to tell us that they're going to be hiring somebody, and so we go through the provisioning process, and then we find out that the day before they never showed up for work. Right, so those accounts that have been created and never used and they're more than 10 days old are a great indication that that happened, right? That account should be deprovisioned. Identifying accounts that are candidates for deletion because they have been suspended for more than 30 days. So part of your provisioning process, it's normal to disable the account, right? We don't delete it because we may have to do an investigation later, or the manager might want to get access to that information, or whatever reason we've just disabled the account rather than delete it. But it's really common to see user accounts that are like forever old. They've been disabled forever, and for some reason nobody's deleting them. I don't know why. I don't know what the value is in keeping those accounts. But
Yeah, I had one they did. They it was 150, 200 employees, and they had almost 2,000 AD accounts. They just moved them into a.
Yeah.
There was a high turnover.
clean up that
rate.
stuff, right?
Yeah, they're like, I don't know, we just move them.
Yeah.
Email, Twitter.
Well, it's kind of it's kind of housekeeping, but and the reason why, right, is if that account is disabled, right, I can't log into that account, but it's really easy to, enable that account on accident, or as an attacker, if I had access to Active Directory, that's an account that's already been provisioned. That's an account that probably wouldn't raise any alarms, so just making it active again, and using that one. So when a contract expires, identifying all accounts belonging to a business partner or contractors, employees, and revoking their access rights. Most people don't even know what contractors are actually accessing their data, so there's a great room for improvement there. You do vendor risk management, and one of the questions you ask vendors is, well, we need to start with identifying who your vendors are. Do you know who your vendors are? And they're like, shoot, yeah, I don't know. How would we find that out? I'm like, I don't know. Find out who you're paying, right? Let's go to accounting and find out who's getting checks and start there. But that's pretty common too. So we talked about this on Tuesday, authorization creep. Authorization creep would be that I retain some of the user access or the rights or the privileges that I had in my previous role in my new role. That's authorization creep. We just keep stacking on. And I suppose if you're in a company like this that doesn't handle provisioning well, you just work there long enough, change enough jobs, and you got admin, probably. Eventually you got so many access rights, you know what to do with it all. But occurs when subjects not only maintain old access rights, but gain new ones as they move from one role to another within the organization. And usually there's a transition period, right? I mean, I understand that usually there's a transition. I'm from this role and I'm in this role. I'm still helping out in this role. I make the transition. That's fine. Account for that in your life cycle. But then once that transition is complete, terminate that account, create a new account with the new privileges. So, whatever, just account for it. User rights or entitlements must be routinely reviewed. This never happens. I mean, rarely do we actually. It's one to review the accounts. It's another to review privileges of accounts to look for authorization creep. That's a little harder to do, but really important to do. Single sign-on. These are other things. So identity as a service, which it just seems to me like it's just another word marketing term, because really identity, I don't know. So identity as a service, 2 categories, according to Gartner, who is the authority, web access software for cloud-based applications, such as software as a service. That seems to make sense. I would have to have some type of identity management for those applications. Web architected applications and cloud-delivered legacy identity management services. So the second one would be where I'd use a service to kind of integrate these disparate systems, and it would be my single sign-on service. So I would single sign on to this IDAAS system, and it would provision me access to other stuff. Lightweight directory access protocol. That's and this is an RFC, so it's legit. Common open protocol for interfacing and querying directory service information. TCP UDP port 389. Close those ports. External. You don't need them. And LDAP-S, which would be secure, it'd be encrypted. TCP 636 and 3269. Anybody read about, did I talk about this on Tuesday? About double pulsar. Did I talk to you guys about double pulsar?
I've seen the term, but I don't really about it.
Yeah. It's a pet peeve of mine. There's you should read my article, my blog article about that one. Did you read it?
No.
No, nobody reads my stuff, but
Whatever.
nobody likes me. I get it. No, it's in there. It's an article about FUD. FUD sells security products, where I get irritated by fear. People just raising, because one of those things I pointed out in there was there's this guy who's the CEO of something. And he tweeted that they're seeing 25%, or roughly 25% of all vulnerable SMB servers on the internet are infected with double pulsar. And he goes, something about the bloodbath continues. Like, bloodbath? Really? That's the word you're going to use to describe this? Let's put it into context. So in this article, I put it into context, like, you just destroy credibility when you use words like that, but they don't, because you're just trying to raise fear. So SMB server on the internet, good idea, bad idea? Bad idea, right? Why would I open up 445 and potentially other ports to allow SMB from the internet, right? SMB is what I use to map network shares and things, right? That no sense at all. So that's one thing. Number two, he said vulnerable. Right. That's one, I've got an SMB server on the internet. Two, I'm not patching it. Right. Okay. Those systems are already compromised. Right. So regardless of double pulsar. And so you're saying 25% of those are compromised. So I did a little more research. I'm like, okay, according to what I can find at the time I wrote it, 184,000 systems are infected with double pulsar. Okay. So put that in perspective. There are 7-ish, depending on the estimates, there's 7-ish billion systems on the internet. So 184,000 out of 7 billion is 0.0026% of the internet is infected with this bloodbath, right? It's just like, man. So when I was reading those ports, I was thinking about that. I'm like, man, come on.
Firewall organizations use
Detonate, right?
That's my favorite.
Yeah. I should do that too. Every time somebody says something in a meeting like that, I'll just start laughing. They'll be like, what's with this guy? He's a jerk. Yeah, but this was a CEO of Phobos Group. I can't remember his name, but he's, he's quoted everywhere about, this malware. And it's just not helping the problem here.
The question was, how do they know how many are infected?
Oh, there's scanners. There's mass scanners that they can use. And there's also a script that was written to identify the infected hosts. Yeah. Good question. All right, so Kerberos. This will be on the test. Kerberos will be on the test. What you'll need, you don't need to know the details. Kerberos is actually a pretty complicated protocol. There's a lot to it. We're going to stay focused on the things that we need to pass the exam. None of us are going to have to dissect, Kerberos or troubleshoot the operations of Kerberos. What you need to understand is kind of what it is. So we're going to stick to the slides pretty much. So a private party authentication service that can be used to support single sign-on, a third party. I don't know if I said private party, but it's a third party. Kerberos is an open standard, however. We'll see that in a minute, that it's there's an RFC around Kerberos. Kerberos itself is the name of that three-headed dog that guards the gates of Hades, right? It was developed originally at MIT. So three heads represent AAA, authentication, authorization, and accountability. The original Kerberos just provided authentication. This is where you can find more information about Kerberos. I'm going to get to its operation here in just a minute. Kerberos is a network authentication system for physically insecure networks. So it's a way for if somebody had plugged into my network and wanted to access systems, they could, if they were using like Wireshark to capture the authentication, they would not be able to, one, see what the authentication actually is, and two, they wouldn't be able, you'll see that Kerberos has replay built, replay protections built in, so I wouldn't be able to replay that authentication either to authenticate. And everything in Kerberos belongs to what's called a Kerberos realm, which is like an NT domain. I mean, it's kind of the same sort of concept. So within the Kerberos realm, everything uses tickets to communicate in a Kerberos domain or realm. So the point here is something could plug into this thing, but if they're not part of the group, they're not going to be able to talk, to the rest of the thing. So that's sort of when I'm talking about physically insecure networks, internal networks could be external, but whatever. So based on the key distribution model presented by Needham and Schroeder, you don't need to know the details about Needham and Schroeder. It's a symmetric encryption algorithm. And Kerberos is built on it. Allows entities communicating over networks to prove their identity to each other, so including clients and servers. So servers will authenticate with clients and clients will authenticate with servers in Kerberos. Provides data stream integrity detection. Oh, there's the eavesdropping, preventing the eavesdropping, the capturing the packets and using that to authenticate with things. And also replay. So I could capture the packets. I have the packets. You can't hide the packets that they exist. So if I can't see what the packets say and then use that information to attack the system, can I take the packets and replay them, just store them and try them again? There's protection against that too. So that's the difference in replay. Data stream integrity, detection of modification and secrecy. Systems like DES. DES is old and dead, but the original Kerberos, that would apply. You want to know just a little bit more about Needham Schroeder, there's just a little bit more, but again, you don't need to know much about Needham Schroeder for the test. And I'm probably even saying it wrong. It might even be Schrader for all I know. I've never talked to him. So single sign-on. So this is stuff that it will definitely be on the test. So there's the RFC. You don't need to know the RFC number, but know that it is. The latest version of Kerberos is, it's a standard. When you see something's tied to an RFC, it's basically become the standard. Uses secret key encryption, provides mutual authentication of both clients and servers, protects against those sniffing attacks and replay attacks. You'll need to know these components. Now, these components don't use our traditional name or nomenclature. Is that that's a word? That's a super awesome word too. It makes me seem really smart right now. That's really cool. So principal, client. So we would normally refer to a principal as a client. It's the client system. It's your workstation typically. The realm is the domain essentially it's part of the group, right? For Kerberos under a single logical authority. Ticket. So tickets are exchanged back and forth and they're used for authentication. They're also used for access to servers, like a file share. You would have to present a ticket that would basically get you into that share. So tickets are data that authenticates a principal's identity, credentials, a ticket, and a key service. A key distribution center, that's kind of where things all kind of flow through. Authenticates the principals. The ticket granting service is a service that will be part of the key distribution center. The ticket granting ticket is the ticket given by the key distribution center. And then client server, communications, whatever, right? So that's going to be memorization, but it's testable. If you want to know a little bit more, this is probably also testable. I think this is the same one that comes from your book. So Sam needs to get access to something. But he has is a ticket to get tickets. It's sent to the key distribution center. Authentication service and TGS are both there. Here's the TGTIF. You can decrypt this response then with your password hash. If I can do that, then that's essentially authenticated me. Here's my TGT. Give me a service ticket. So give me a service ticket so I can access a file share. Here's your service ticket. Okay, great. Now I'll send that ticket to the file share. That will authenticate. Okay, that's a legitimate ticket. Let's set up a session. So in a basic sense, that's how it works. If you want to go a little deeper, this is not testable. But if you want to go deeper, if you want to understand the next level of this, you can, right? Now, why that might be important is Windows uses this. Windows authentication is built on Kerberos now since 2000, Windows 2000. So this is kind of what's happening behind the scenes. So it's more FYI.
Does this happen just at login?
At login in when you access systems on the network, yep. So this is what you need to know. That and that, two big things, right? Now, yeah, and that'll be a challenge for people who don't work with Kerberos or whatever. I don't personally work with Kerberos. You know, it's lower level than what I usually deal with, but it's on the test. So strengths of Kerberos. This will also be on the test. Mutual authentication of client and server. That's a great thing. If a rogue KDC pretended to be a real KDC, it wouldn't have access to the keys, so I can't impersonate the key distribution center. Mitigates replay attacks. That's also a really good thing. So if I sniff those credentials and try to replay them, I can't because there's timestamps associated with it. There's expirations and all that kind of stuff. But here are the weaknesses. Kerberos, the way it's designed, not necessarily the way it's implemented in your environments, but the KDC stores plain text keys. So if I could compromise the KDC, then I can get access to those keys potentially, which means that I have the keys to the kingdom. So compromising the KDC, physical or electronic. My rule of thumb is if you have physical access to something, it's compromised. Right? It's only a matter of time. Given physical access to a computer system, it's only a matter of time before I'll get, or an attacker will get logical access. So physical can lead to the compromise of every key in the realm. That's obviously a bad thing. KDC and TGS are single points of failure. If they go down, no credentials will be issued. That's obviously a problem. Replay attacks are still possible, but only for a limited time. That would be a pretty sophisticated attack if you were going to do that. I don't know of any that have been done in real life, but conceivably you could do that if you do it within the time frame for the timestamps. And then you could jam or DOS the client that originally was trying to authenticate and then impersonate, but whatever. Not going to happen, but that's a weakness. Any user can request a session key for another user. Kerberos does not mitigate a malicious local host. Plaintext keys may exist in memory or cache. That's true. And this is not what you're seeing in like a Windows 2008 server environment. These things wouldn't hold true, but in Kerberos, the way Kerberos is, this would be true. So you'll need to know the weaknesses. The number one weakness is that we're storing plaintext keys. So that is the test of these are all probably testable, but that's the number one testable one for KDC or for Kerberos. Sesame. So Sesame is kind of the replacement, not really the replacement. It's kind of it addresses some of Kerberos's weaknesses. Sesame stands for Secure European System for, you don't have to memorize that, for applications in a multi-vendor environment. Things you'll need to know about Sesame is that it is a single sign-on solution. And it's kind of built upon Kerberos to like just makes Kerberos better, sort of. The biggest weakness for Kerberos is the plaintext storage of symmetric keys. Sesame doesn't do that. Uses packs instead of keys or tickets. And if you want know more information, that's about all you need to know for Sesame. I don't know of any place Sesame is actually being used, but there you go. So Radius is really popular. Radius would be an authentication service. It's also got accountability. It's got authentication, authorization, and accountability built in. So it's a AAA system. It stands for Remote Authentication Dial-In User Service, and this is an open standard. There are flavors of this, like steel-belted Radius has its own kind of flavor. Microsoft has its own flavor. It has Radius built in. Third-party authentication system described in 2 RFCs, there's 2865 and 66. Uses UDP 1812 for authentication and 1813 for accounting. I'll go through a slide where I just show you the communications. It's pretty basic. Formerly used 1645 and 1646. Some will still use that. It is considered a AAA system, so it authenticates, authorizes, and provides for accounting. There's the link to the RFC. Now, the responses are called AVPs, or attribute value pairs, and you can see the codes that essentially represent the attribute value pairs below. This is what they look like in actuality. So the first is an access request. You can see that the code is over there. The response is an access accept or access reject. Those are those next 2 codes. The same process essentially happens for the accounting. Then you see the access challenge. So it's a really simple process, right? It's usually, now access server, radius server are 2 different components. But anyway, pretty simple. This is just a diagram of it laid out. So you have the access clients, you have the network access servers, and then you have the radius server. So the access server would just forward the request onto the radius server. The radius server would have, maybe a user account database, or it might be built into the system, or might rely on an external one. Pretty simple, right? I don't know. You don't need to know much more than that for radius. Diameter. So at the time, I think that the book was probably written, diameter was still not really in production, or not formally adopted yet. But radius, it is the successor to radius. Improved performance, improved reliability. Also uses AVPs, but a lot more different options in the attribute value pairs. Instead of 8 bits, so 32 bits, 2 to the 32, which is really big, versus 2 to the 8, which would be 256 different kind of possible AVP combinations. Single server to manage policies for services, as opposed to radius, which requires other servers. So we can see back in this, there are other servers that are required. In diameter, it can all be compacted into one system. Also provides AAA functionality, uses TCP, and then it was a draft standard, 3588. I don't know if it's been adopted yet or not. That's diameter. TACAX and TACAX Plus. So if you're a Cisco person, you probably know TACAX and TACAX Plus. TACAX is, nobody's using TACAX anymore. Everything's kind of moved to TACAX Plus. But it's another authentication database and system. Terminal access control or access control system is what TACAX stands for. Centralized control system requires users to send an ID and static password. TACAX uses UDP port 49. You can also configure it to use TCP port 49. Reusable passwords have security vulnerability. TACAX Plus doesn't allow that. We also can build on that and do 2-factor authentication with TACAX Plus as an extension. TACAX wouldn't do that. TACAX and TACAX Plus, even though they share the same name, they're not compatible. TACAX uses TCP port 49 for authentication with the TACAX server. Yeah, other similar functionality, Radius. Radius only encrypts the password. TACAX will encrypt everything except for the header. So it's TACAX and TACAX Plus. Sounds cool to say TACAX and TACAX Plus, doesn't it? TACAX. TACAX. That sounds smart. I use TACAX too. That's my new vernacular.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that the word I used before? That sounded smart on vernacular. Holy crap, you guys!
All kinds of multi-syllables.
Dang, I'm surprising the crap out of myself tonight.
So real quick, with the going back with Kerberos, CISSP, and diameter, or radius, diameter, and all that, you're just going to want to be able to tell the difference between those, because they're going to give you a scenario, and then there'll be 4 choices, and you got to know which one is the right. And there'll be CISSP, Kerberos, and then 2 that are not close, or radius, diameter, and 2 that are way off. So you need to be able to tell all those apart and identify which will be the most correct.
Right. Yeah, and you shouldn't need more than what's on the slides.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah, that'll be enough.
But I think you're exactly.
You got to be able to tell.
Yeah. Yep, I agree. Even though I haven't taken the test in like forever ago. you would know better too. All right, so
I
here's,
still haven't recovered from that. I still have PTSD.
do you? I noticed you got a twitch. I didn't know if that was from.
That's what happened when you do the CISSP and CIS.
It's my
2
CISSP.
months apart.
It's my CISSP twitch.
Yeah.
All right, so PAP and CHAP. PAP is, the older one. PAP is not secure. Everything's in clear text. Don't use PAP. You won't see PAP. Password authentication protocol. CHAP is relatively secure. It's been around for a long time. 2, RFC 1994, which makes it pretty old. No, the password's never really sent with CHAP, right? It's essentially the password's never sent. It's encrypted. It's the hash of the password that gets sent, right? So if you can decrypt the message and compare it with what it should be, then that would be authenticated. So it's a 3-way, not 3-way, 4, well, it is 3-way. So challenge username are optional. This is actually 2 PPOE clients, so PPOE, but it's the same method. It's using CHAP here. Pretty basic. We talked about this on Tuesday too, didn't we? CHAP, the knots, and all that good stuff. Remember that? Okay. Microsoft Active Directory. You guys probably know Active Directory. If you guys are IT folk, you probably know Active Directory better than I do. I'm not IT folk. I don't, get in Active Directory much anymore. But I remember pre-Active Directory. That was a good time. Use the concept of domain. So a domain really is a single authority that controls access, right? They're boundaries. So multiple domains would have multiple boundaries, and I have to set up some type of a trust between the 2 boundaries for them to operate and work well together. So primary means to control access within the domain. That's sort of where the database, the Active Directory database also is kind of segmented. So authentication based on trust relationships. So you'll need to know the difference between transitive and non-transitive trusts, and you'll need to know the difference between one-way trust and two-way trust. So if you've been a Microsoft person, you already know those things. And we're going to go over those here briefly. It does use the Kerberos authentication protocol, fully integrated since Windows 2000. Each domain has a separate authentication process and space. Each domain may contain different users, network assets, or objects. And then trusts. We'll go here, so one-way and two-way trusts, and then transitive and non-transitive. So one-way trust is I trust you, you may not trust me, so things flow this way. I can access objects in the place that I trust, right, but not necessarily the other way around. Two-way trust, we trust each other, we share stuff back and forth. If I trust A, does that mean and you trust B, do I get to also trust B? That's the difference between the transitive and non-transitive. One flows through, one doesn't. So those are the things you need to know about trust. One-way, two-way, transitive, and non-transitive. So A trusts B and B trusts C. Does that mean A gets to trust C also? That would be a transitive trust, right? And that's it. Identity and access management, domain 5, done. We are masters of domain 5.
It's a relatively easy domain.
It is a pretty easy domain. So is that domain 6. We're gonna get through domain 6 pretty fast too. So domain, what are we talking about here? Assessing. I can do vernacular and the other word is really good, but assessing. Access control and software testing methods. These are pretty standard, right? Dynamic testing would be testing an application while it's running. That's most people test those things. Fuzzing would be just sending a bunch of random stuff and with the intent of kind of pushing the application to the limits and maybe seeing if it will crash for you. If it does crash, then maybe there's something in the way it crashed that would identify a vulnerability that then I could potentially compromise, in another test. So fuzzing is a popular tool for penetration testing to see how applications will operate. Penetration testing itself penetration testing is one of those terms in our industry that is so overused. A lot of people refer to penetration testing as vulnerability scanning. I always draw the line that penetration testing is the exploitation of vulnerabilities. So some vulnerability I'm actually going to exploit. That to me is a penetration The testing part, it's what's the objective of the penetration. That's the penetration testing. So what the book says, unauthorized or authorized attempt to break into an organization's physical or electronic perimeter, and sometimes both. So we do, like a penetration test for, social engineering is a great way to do a physical social engineer or physical penetration test. The objective is maybe to get into the data center. So, that would be the test. Anyway, static testing, that's testing code that's not running. So maybe we've got access to source code and we're going to do static testing. And so you usually run a tool. You can do it manually if you got people that'll read like that, but you run some tools that'll go through the code and look for common mistakes and vulnerabilities. Those tools are pretty expensive, but static testing is when the code is not running. Synthetic transactions is essentially building automated scripts to mimic what normal users would do with the application. You'd use this in like a QA environment to make sure that the application passes muster before you throw it into production. Now in a QA environment, it's probably good to do all these, right? I mean, depending on who's using the application, it's better that you find it out than the bad guys. Speaking of good guys and bad guys, so black hat hackers. So there's different types of hackers. You knew that, but officially, now you know for sure. Black hat hackers are the bad guys, right? Those are the guys that don't have any boundaries. They always have an advantage over the white hat guys, the guys that are good, the guys that are ethical, the guys like us, because they don't have the boundaries. We do have boundaries. There are certain things that we will not do in our tests, right? We won't take your systems offline. We'll stick to the objectives, that have been stated. We have boundaries that we use. In social engineering attacks, my rule of thumb for social engineering attacks is we have to leave you feeling better off for having met us. That means that I'm not going to use manipulation. I'm going to use influence to get to the objective. The difference there is, let's say, as an example, I want to distract you with something. So I might go even to the point where I'm going to try to convince you that your daughter is in the hospital with cancer. And I'm going to use that emotion that evokes in you to compromise or get to something, right? That's a black hat. White hat doesn't do that, right? We would never go that far. We wouldn't play that way. So that's, just an example of a black hats always have an advantage over white hats. We have rules, they don't. So white hats are the good guys. Gray hats aren't the guys. I used to think that gray hats, if you're not black, you're not white, you're just confused, right? But that's not necessarily true. Gray hats are not, they don't have malicious intent. What makes them kind of gray hats is they're doing more, I think, researchy type work would be gray hat people. Where white hats usually have a specific objective, completely ethical and things. But anyway, that's black, white, and gray.
That'd be like somebody that tells the company, hey, you have this vulnerability, and then a month later exploits it and reveals it to say, hey.
That would be I think that would be a black hat.
Even though they informed and they're kind of doing it. Like, there's been examples where they don't do real harm, but it's like, hey, you haven't fixed it, so now I'm going to exploit it and kind of.
Or just release.
Yeah, that may be gray hat.
Google CPU.
Yeah, that might qualify as a gray hat.
Yeah, I just didn't know if that's some examples.
Somebody we wouldn't hire, but.
It's like gray.
That's the thing with security companies. I mean, like us, we can never cross the line of ethics, right? Because the things we need to have with all of our customers is trust. You have to trust us, right? You're showing us things, we're doing things that hopefully nobody else will know. We have to be credible, so we have to be good at what we do. If we say we can do it, we need to be able to do it. And the third thing is you have to like us, right? We can't be jerks, So we have those three things. We'll keep customers for life, but so that, ethics, can't cross it. The gray hats, yeah, they might cross. They'll cross the ethics line. Maybe not necessarily and their intent is probably, their heart's in the right place. Their methods are questionable.
Yeah, they like force companies into action by putting it out there that the vulnerability exists. So
Right.
being like, if you don't patch this now, then you will be in trouble.
Right.
But, yeah.
So pen testing, white hat hackers. So in the traditional sense, pen tests are only done by white hats. They're done with people who have authorization. We have legal agreements in place that allow us to do the things that we're planning on doing. Sometimes I think I shared with you guys the story of the having the police officer help me, having that letter of engagement. That's that. Pen tests sometimes called penetration tests. Pen tests determine whether black hats can do the same, again, with limitations. Black hats aren't limited by a legal agreement that says you can do this and you can't do that. A narrow test. So in every penetration test, more than I think than most other tests, you really have to nail down what the objective is for the test before you initiate the test. Everybody's got to be on the same page. This is what we're doing. This is what we're not going to do. These different kinds of tests, which, these come from the book. We don't use these really like this. So network internet test, we could be testing the internet or your resilience from the internet potentially. Internet DMZ war dialing. Anybody war dialed before? Yeah. We talked last on Tuesday. You don't even know what a phone is anymore. Now you're going to do war dialing. So war dialing would be looking for modems. You used to load up an automated machine, a script, to just start dialing numbers, right? Starting with, I don't know, the first number in the block to the last number in the block, and you just let it run, right? And then it would report to which numbers had modems that connected, and then you would connect to those and see if you could get access to something. That's war dialing. So nobody has phones anymore or modems really, so nobody really does war dialing anymore. We should go back to that, by the way. We should go back to phones, because if nobody's war dialing, fine, we should be using phones again. And then when they catch up to that, then we'll go back to voice over IP again. Wireless testing, so you're doing some wireless assessment, not necessarily wireless pen tests. So wireless pen test would be trying to maybe try to crack, if it's a pre-shared key on WPA2, maybe be trying to crack that. Otherwise, if you've implemented WPA2, it's pretty solid usually. And physical, we talked about all that stuff. Now, remember when we talked about client-side, server-side, and all that stuff? So if client-side attack would be, it's where the attack is focused on, right? So client-side versus server-side, and then web application tests all can fit inside of penetration testing. So war dialing, if you've never done it, modem dials a series of phone numbers looking for an answering modem, carrier tone, because they always go, you've heard modems probably. I should have done an audio clip for people who haven't even heard of what a modem sounds like. And social engineering uses the human mind to bypass security controls. So just give them some drugs. It's an easy way to bypass the mind. You don't even see me right now. It's not that kind of social engineering. That'd be sweet though. I'm not even here, bro. I just stole your identity. Yeah, social engineering is fun because you do play off the human. People have certain things. I told you about micro expressions. Did I tell you about micro expressions? Yeah. Okay. Micro expressions are kind of cool if you get into that. It's pretty fun. There's actually a guy, I can't remember his name, Dr. something. If you're interested, I can find it out for you later, but who will train you to identify micro expressions, and then you can do tests to see how well you identified them and whether you got it correct or not. It's pretty cool. All right, so social engineering, yeah, they're almost always successful. Combination of many types of attacks, certainly client-side attacks where we're trying to compromise, getting you to a phishing attack or open up an attachment or visit a website or any kind of things. That's got a human element to it. Almost all the attacks you see online that you read about have a human element to them, right? It's the easiest way. I mean, look at it from an attacker's point of view. I'm looking for a return on my investment. I'm not looking to work any harder than I have to get what I want. Is it easy? It's easy to send 1,000 emails, right? And if I know I'm going to get 20, 30% return, it's a pretty good return rather than hacking all night trying to get into your web app. It's no fun. Social engineering is good. It's cool. It works. So, you know, training awareness is a big deal for that. But anyway. Oh, War Games. Bam. I had to put that on there. It's brought back memories. You guys seen War Games as a movie? I got to go get this again and watch it again and again and again. I love this movie. Remember that? All right, anyway, War Games. I just had to throw it in there. I love War Games. Those old hacker movies are just
Real
classics.
quick, this is part of our training, but 91% of data breaches start with phishing, so social.
91,
So
yeah.
just that's how easy it is.
It's
Why
yeah,
it's so important.
yeah. It's so trivial. It's such a low skill attack too. All right, so penetration testing. These are different types of penetration testing. So zero knowledge is what it is. I don't know anything about your system. You haven't given me any schematics, drawings, diagrams. I don't know anything. Right? I'm just going to start from scratch. That is zero knowledge. A full knowledge, you give me everything, right? Sometimes, so black box on the first one, crystal box on the second one, you give me everything I ask for. Now, this would all be based on the objective. If you want to know truly what a black hat would do, I might go more with the zero knowledge. But if I want to test really a certain component maybe of the security, or I just want to test security in general, but I want you to dig a lot deeper, maybe you'd go with a full knowledge, type test. And then there's partial knowledge, something in between, right? That's where you set up boundaries, and these are things, we're going to give you, things we're not. The cool thing about the best penetration tests, the way they work the best is if you have full cooperation from whoever it is you're testing with, right? If they're alongside you doing penetration tests, and you get up against a boundary, I can't seem to get past this, have them take that boundary away and then, go further, because then you're testing the effectiveness of the boundary and then beyond. So you're testing the layers of defense, right? When we're talking about, a multi, defense in depth situation, so those are the best ones, I think, where you have that cooperation and you're working together. Plus there's that knowledge transfer thing too, right? The client, hopefully will learn and be more penetration testier. So these are some tools. Some of them are Core Impact is the bomb. You ever used Core Impact before? Got 60 grand? You can go get it. That's why you haven't used it before. It's super expensive, but it's a damn nice tool. I got it approved. In all the organizations I've worked at, I had it approved in the budget one time, and I got to use it. I only stayed. Then it was like, I don't know, 7-8 months later when that company was acquired by another company. And so I lost my Core Impact. That was the only time I got to use it. And man, it was so much fun. I mean, it's just point and click, no skill. Everything's built in. You can compromise anything. It was just sweet. Metasploit is a classic one. There's two versions, open source version, and then there's the one that is Rapid 7. Yeah, community version. Community version just basically gives you the framework, right? And then 125 network security tools. They update that, some every once in a while. There's a ton of tools, and you can create your own tools. What's the distro now that everybody's using? Kali Linux, yeah. There's probably another 10 distros that you can use. Distribution that's custom built for pen testing. You just load it into a VM and you got all your tools right there. So pen testers use the following methodology. Some do, some don't, but this is in general planning, right? There's always three things. I repeat myself over and over again, but three things in the planning. What's our objective? Who's our audience? And what are our constraints? Have to nail those down every single time if you want a successful project. So that's part of planning. Reconnaissance. So, what am I working with? You're trying to kind of figure out. Oftentimes you'll do reconnaissance without ever touching anything. In an external kind of phase 4 type stuff for FISA, we do reconnaissance by looking through Google tools, doing FOCA, which is no longer supported. We should take that up, by the way, and we'll just take it now. Anyway, there's a bunch of tools for reconnaissance, but we're not actually touching anything. Usually you don't touch things until you get to the scanning phase, which is called enumeration. So this is where I'm, you're enumerating the systems, trying to find out what services are running, what operating systems are listening on those services. It's that kind of stuff. And then vulnerability assessment, that'd be a vulnerability scan. A lot of pen testers go past this too, looking for older, what version of stuff, is it a vulnerable version, those kinds of things. And then you determine what exploits you're going to use to compromise those vulnerabilities. And then you need to report on it. We're doing a lot of our pen tests now, just assuming that we already have access to we've already compromised the human element, right? Because if 91% of all attacks are happening that way, and we know that 30% of your users are going to fall for our attack, do you want us to go through that process, or do you just want to assume that it happened? And some will say do it. Some will say, yeah, let's just assume it happened. Okay, well, that's a different test. Even the ones that keep us out, 13 minutes, I think is how long it took to get domain admin on a really big company, really big law firm. They were blocking all attachments inbound because our first attack was to go client side. Let's get a client and then we'll pivot and do whatever. They were 7 minutes. Yeah. They were blocking all attachments. So that attack's not gonna work. So then what we did is we fished their OWA and then used their own OWA server to send the attachment. So that got us, in, and then from there, it only took 7 minutes to get domain admin. So black hat hackers typically follow a similar methodology, maybe. Black hats also cover their tracks. That's important to know. So because preservation of evidence, we know we can't prevent all bad things from happening, so we better be able to detect it and then respond to it. Part of that detection and part of that response is going to be the log files. An attacker knows that, so the way attackers usually work is they find a vulnerability, they compromise it, elevate their privileges to that of an administrator, plant a backdoor, delete log files. Come back later, use that system, pivot to another system, use that system, pivot to another system before they find the gold mine that they've been looking for. So, that's why we like centralized logging. We know that logs are what we're going to use to try to investigate what took place. So, if I don't protect the logs, if they're just stored locally, that's a bad thing for us. So, but black hats do that. They erase their logs. They don't want you to know that they were there. And if you did find out, they don't want you to know how they did it.
You make sure you know that methodology anymore.
Yeah.
So that was a big one.
Yep.
Isn't that what's called kill chain?
Another one of those buzzwords. Yeah. Kill chain. Just kill it somewhere in there. Yeah. And if you do, in incident investigations, you can see like a lot of places where, man, if you just would have freaking looked right there, right in front of you, you would have seen it and been able to stop it. That's the kill chain, right? Anything in the chain, if you just would have done this, it would have killed it. All right, so why would I do these things? Why would I do penetration testing? Obviously it's to give you some level of assurance that security is good. Our definition of security is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That's, important parts of it. So we have to ensure that whatever we do capture needs to remain confidential, because we may there's the potential you would cause a breach. There's a potential that you may find evidence of another breach. It's not uncommon to do a penetration test and find that you're not the first one there. Somebody else has been there. That's bad. Oftentimes you'll test for a dummy file. So, I don't want to get your credit card information. I don't want to ever see your credit card information. I don't want to get PHI. I want you to give me some file that would represent that PHI, and I'll get that, and then we'll say that was good. Penetration testers ensure system integrity. We play by these rules. Black hats don't. Signs of previous. Yeah, that's interesting when that happens. So vulnerability testing or vulnerability scanning. Vulnerability is not patching. Patching is a vulnerability, but vulnerabilities aren't necessarily patching. Usually you find vulnerabilities in one of two places. It's either missing patches or it's configuration errors. So vulnerability testing would test for both of those things. Outdated software and patching we're going to put together, but system misconfiguration is a big one too. So Nessus, that's a very popular one. We use that one a lot. OpenVAS is an open source one. It's free. You can go download it and use it and play with it and all that stuff. It also comes part of OSSIM. Did I tell you what that is? That's a SIM solution that's open source, maintained by Alien Vault. It comes with OpenVAS too if you're doing any of that kind of stuff. Qualys, Nexpose, those are kind of the big players. The big commercial players are Nessus, Qualys, and Rapid7, Nexpose. Missing patches, configuration errors, the CVSS scoring system. So I think we're on CVSS version 3 now. But CVSS is a common method to score vulnerabilities, which is great because if I want to compare one to another, or I want to compare one over time, I can use scoring to do that, right? I could take, let's say, the CVSS score per system is a metric that I'm going to use to measure the effectiveness of my vulnerability management program. So the average CVSS score today is 95, because high critical severity vulnerabilities are typically a 10. High severity vulnerabilities are typically like a 7 to 9. So a 10 is where I'm at today, or I'm at a 90 today. I want to get to 65, right? You can use CVSS to measure that, which is really nice over time. Security audits. So I hate audits. Hate the word audit. The whole thing ticks me off. But testing against a published standard. So that testing against a published standard may not necessarily be an audit, right? It could be an assessment. I know it's semantics, but they're different. So you take a standard and we're measuring how, and it might be an internal standard. You might create your own standard and then you're going to test how well you're doing against that standard. PCI DSS compliance, we talked about a little bit. That's payment card industry data security standard. SOC 2 type 1, SOC 2 type 2. There's actually a SOC 3 too called CISSP, which I've never seen anybody do it, but you can do it. There's a web trust too, which is also the SOC 3. So those are just auditing, actually SOC 2 and SOC 3, or SOC 2, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 2 type 1, SOC 2 type 2, and SOC 3 are all audits. High trust is another one, which is not going to be on the test, but that's another one you run into. Purpose is to validate, verify that the organization meets the requirements in the stated published standard. Yeah. I'm not going to tell you much more about how those work, but if you don't want to know, we can have a discussion. So I run into these all day, every day. So will you probably. So security assessments, holistic approach to assessing the effectiveness of access control, broad scope. Security assessments view many controls across multiple domains and may include the following. That's true, potentially all those things. We break assessments up into 4 phases. Phase 1 is administrative controls. Phase 2 is physical controls. Phase 3 is internal technical controls. And phase 4 is external technical controls. All tied to our definition of what information security is, right? Administrative, physical, technical controls. These things like policies, procedures be phase 1. Assessing real world effectiveness of administrative controls, that'd be phase 1. Change management be phase 1. Architectural review be phase 3. Pen tests, we don't do that as part of assessments. Vulnerability assessments in phase 3, phase 4, and security audits. And that's kind of where these things would fit in that broader assessment methodology that we follow. But all things are basically assessing the effectiveness. Now, out of the effectiveness, I can make some conclusions. I could potentially make the conclusion where there's a lack of effectiveness, a weakness in a control, right? That's a weakness. Are there applicable threats to that weakness? If there are applicable threats, that should lead to some kind of a calculation of the likelihood of something bad happening, the impact if it did, right? That's the logic that creates a risk value out of doing assessments. So if I'm trying to validate, how effective this control is, the rest of the math is not simple, but it's logical. So keywords, assessing the effectiveness. Another thing that people use for when they say assessing the effectiveness is maturity, control maturity. Where there are gaps in the control or weakness or vulnerability, what are the applicable threats? Vulnerabilities plus threats equal likelihoods and impacts. That's not real math, but that's tries to, that's the point, I guess. Risk. Now, FISA is what we use. FISA, we think F stands for in FISA. Nobody knows?
I know. I'm on the internet.
No, it doesn't. It stands for fiducial. Yep, we had to change it up because we're making it available to everybody to use. We don't want to be the only people in the world that can do FISAs. Everybody should be doing them. This is how FISA works, right? So we create calculations out of all that stuff, create some kind of score. This 605.58 is fair. It's not poor. If you drop below 600, you get the orange one. You drop below 500, you're like, seriously get a clue, right? We have companies that are in the very poor that just like, are you kidding me, you guys? We have some companies in the good. The point is not to get to the excellent. So we don't want 780s because that's usually an indication you're spending too much money on security. That's possible. You're not in the business to do that. You're in the business to make money. So, keep that in check too. Anyway. Internal and third-party audits. So internal audits, some companies have an internal audit department, or they've got people that do audits on the inside. There are two types of audits. There's structured and unstructured audits. They have different audiences, different objectives. I would use a structured audit. I would work together with the internal audit department because that's an external audience, a structured audit. I want this to look good. We both want this to look good, right? So if you find something, tell me, give me the opportunity to fix it and test it again. And let's go through a couple of iterations of that so that this audit comes out looking the way we both want it to. So the purpose is to validate compliance. An unstructured audit is find something that helps me improve. I'm the guy, like I'm the CISO, and I'm going through an unstructured audit. The purpose of the audit is for you to help me make my security program better. Nobody's going to see this except for me and you. So that's different. A lot of internal audit departments don't get that. They think every audit is an unstructured audit, regardless of the audience. So what you end up doing is I air all my dirty laundry to the board. That's
It
not
works really well.
No,
Very
it
good
doesn't.
for your career.
I just finished a project that was the CISO, really good CISO, by the way, and internal audit were doing that. They were not getting along because of this failure to see what the objectives really are and all this. And they paid, I don't know, a lot of money for me to come in and say, look, come on guys, whatever, It ended up being like 26, 27 findings, things that I think you need to improve in order to make this flow better for everybody. And, then they had a whole full day off site to talk about it, and, and they hugged.
Trustful.
What's that?
Trustful.
A trust fall, yep. But that's what can happen when internal audit goes bad. Third-party audits, experts, hopefully, adds credibility. Everybody, it's amazing how many organizations will use us they already know the problem. They just want somebody else to come in and tell them the problem, and then they're going to go and do something about it. So that happens quite a bit. So experts adds credibility, teaching, knowledge transfer is really huge in all the work that we do. We want you to know how to do this yourself so that you don't have to hire us. Next time we can work on solving some of the bigger problems. So security audit logs. So 5 mistakes of log analysis by Anton Schuwacken. These are legit, right? Logs are not reviewed on a regular, timely basis. And attackers know this too, by the way, right? They read stuff. Audit logs and audit trails are not stored for a long enough period. A lot of Windows systems are set up as defaults, right? And then they write over themselves. So, I don't even have to delete if I can't get access to delete the log files, I can just create enough traffic that will just overwrite the stuff I didn't want you to see. Or a lot of times we won't get called into an incident investigation until a couple of weeks after the incident took place, and there's nothing left anymore. So logs are not standardized or viewable by correlation tool sets. They are only viewable from the system being audited. Log entries, and so a correlation tool set would be something like a SIM device would do the aggregation, correlation, and then the reporting. Log entries and alerts are not prioritized. Audit some people think every event is an incident. Events and incidents are different things, right? So not knowing what the log says and what it means, doesn't necessarily mean that it's an incident, right? Not the super highest priority. Audit records are reviewed only for the bad stuff. So that's another thing where you have to understand how to put logs into context. And that's why SIM solutions are good at that. Other things, reviewing security audit logs with an IT system is one of the easiest ways to verify access control mechanisms are performing adequately. You'd be amazed at the things you can find in log files. Reviewing audit logs is primarily a detective control. There's an SP for that, so the Special Publication 800-92. If you want to know, I want to get into this logging thing, tell me what I should be logging, where I should be getting my logs from. That's a great publication for that. You can also go to CIS, Centers for Internet Security. They've got the benchmarks. So if you, in those benchmarks are log settings for your Windows servers or whatever you're benchmarking. That's also a great place to start. You can apply that with group policy. So in practice, it's not terribly difficult to do these things. But things I want to get logs from, network security, what I would do if I was implementing something brand new, I know I can't do all these at once. It's going to take me maybe 6 months or maybe a year to finally get this all done and prioritize which ones of these are most important in my environment and start there and then add on as you go. So antivirus logs, IDS, IPS logs, remote access software such as VPN logs, web proxy, vulnerability management, authentication servers, routers, and firewalls. I would add to that also I want to audit. I want to know what internal audit's doing in my system. So that's always, anytime I hire that's why when we do vulnerability scanning, we have you create an FRSecure account so that you can audit what it is that we did in case something bad happened.
Real quick, is one of be tested on the log types be collected on that NIST? I don't remember.
No, I don't think so.
No.
I don't think it'd be tested specifically on should I log this, should I log that? Because it is pretty subjective. This is just kind of good things to consider.
I got a fun, really quick audit story.
Audit story.
Log story.
Fun.
Well,
Fun.
I found
Well, the story might be fun. The audit itself
I
was.
found a domain controller that was a file server that had 400 gig of files on it. It was a print server. The event log was set to the default. It had about 3 minutes before it was overwriting.
Every 3 minutes it
It was
overwrites.
overwriting every 3 minutes. So we increased it to like 20 meg, and I think we got to like 4 or 5 megs, and that was it.
Wow.
That was able to be demoted.
Yeah,
So yeah, you see the crazy stuff.
for sure. And I busted so many people by looking at logs. I mean, you'll be amazed at the things you'll find in logs. I busted a guy. What?
Busted.
Well, yeah, because you were doing something you shouldn't have been doing. You should be busted. What the hell are you doing? It was a senior vice president of a banking company in the West Coast, right? And it was showing up in the firewall logs, just weird kind of stuff. I was like, what the hell is this? Well, it turns out he was surfing porn. And so those are the worst kinds of incidents to investigate because now I have to go look at it and you can't unsee stuff. You just can't.
Well, and then you see things you don't want to see.
No.
It's really awkward.
And you really come to understand that pornography is an addiction. It escalates. I mean, I've learned that about human behavior now from doing so many investigations that turns out to be something like that. It's like starts out with, seemingly innocent. Next thing you're into just weird stuff and you can't unsee it. It's like the dirtiest thing. Anyway, but that comes from logs. You never know it. You would never know that this person was doing these things and they get fired and hopefully they get fired and you hope they get fired and get some help for it. You know what I mean? At the end of the day. What?
Said no fun.
No, I hate those. And somebody else gets those incidents now.
Or being a woman and having to tell a man that
Oh.
you shouldn't have that on your screensaver.
Oh yeah.
One of our lenders, that was not a good thing.
No. Well, the thing is too, I mean, yeah, I'm not going there. So SP 800-92, some more other stuff. So the types of logs, for an operating system, system events, audit records, applications, client requests and server responses, usage information, significant operational actions, it all sort of makes sense. You don't need to memorize those things, but just know, I guess, agree with, yeah. None of it seems out of the ordinary, right? The things I would log. So centralized logging. Now, knowing the attack vector of the people that I'm really interested in, I know that they delete logs, right? I know that they use that administrative account, that they elevate somehow they elevated their privileges. They made it find a service account that they could log in interactively, something. They elevated their privileges to that of an administrator, and then they deleted the log files. So in order for me to protect that, I store logs in a centralized location that uses different authentication than the one that they just compromised, right? So I wouldn't make it Active Directory integrated, the logging system. It would be a separate authentication database, because if the attacker pivots and finds the log system, he's going to go to that log system and delete his logs, right? I'm still kind of screwed. So using a different authentication database is, I think, important. A lot of times we'll isolate log systems in their own isolated network segment, again, to restrict, to keep them protected. You'll find when you have an incident how important logs are, right? I mean, it's sometimes critical in an incident response. So SIEM, Security Information and Event Management, is what SIEM stands for. Does give me centralized logging, log protection, log aggregation, so I can take logs from different systems and aggregate them together, and then I can run correlation rules against those logs to find patterns of activities that happen across systems. So we know that a lot of attacks isn't just one system. It's a series of systems that happened in this particular attack. There's lots of them like that. That's pretty standard. And then dashboard reporting, right? I don't want to go through logs. Who wants to go through logs? Really? I mean, anybody? Nobody? Good. When there's a video of me that exists somewhere. This is back when in my PIX days. It was a PIX 520 firewall. And I was going through logs, and I was scrolling through the logs with my finger. I did it every morning. That's how we did it. Every morning I'd get up, if you've looked at enough PIX firewall logs, you would identify patterns, right? So you could just scroll through and then, oh, what's that? So a pattern would not fit with the rest of the things. You'd be able to mentally do that. You did it so many damn times. And I fell asleep, and I'm still scrolling. Somebody got that on video. Yeah. I don't know where that video is, but I know it was taken. So software testing methods, again, static testing is testing with the application is not running. It's static, it's code. I'm looking through code, I'm doing code analysis. Dynamic testing is when the code is running, the application is running. White box software testing means basically I have access to everything. I have access to the source code, data structures, variables, documentation, procedures, all that stuff. I may have access to production code and QA code, whatever. You kind of have access to anything you need to complete the test. Black box testing is I don't have any details at all about the software. Traceability matrix is tracing the functionality of the software to the requirements that have been stated, right? The specs. Does the software meet what we were trying to accomplish with it? You'd use a traceability matrix to do that. Fuzzing is, again, sending random data with the purpose of trying to make that application crash or act in a way it's not supposed to. Attackers would use that to identify potential vulnerability. We would use it for testing, kind of the same thing. Combinatorial software testing, basically testing all the potential software inputs, the normal inputs. Yeah, it's a black box test. So static testing, there it is again. If you want to know more about static testing, there's a whole list of tools. There are so many tools. There's some that are better known than others, whatever. Pick the one that, if you're going to do static code analysis, pick an app. I don't think an application that's written kind of as the Swiss Army knife, we can do static code analysis across all languages is as good as one that's written for a specific language. So if you're writing, in .NET, there are code analysis tools that will analyze. They're specifically built to analyze .NET code, right? Personally, I would like that better. But anyway, static testing, you get the point of that. This is a traceability matrix, so you can see requirements here, functions here, where does it map, whatever. You know, this is a spreadsheet. You can use whatever for that. Unit testing is, you know, software is built kind of in modules, built in pieces and chunks. Unit testing would be built, you know, testing a module or a chunk of the code. Functions, procedures, objects. Installation testing would be testing, obviously, how the application installs. Does it install correctly? Integration testing is, there's different, I made a change. This is really closely related to regression testing, but integration testing is I wrote something new in the application. How does it play with other things in the application or in the system as a whole? That's integration testing. Regression testing is testing after I've applied an update or something new in the application. Regression testing is that. And acceptance testing and user acceptance testing, I think, are really kind of synonymous. You know, it's they're kind of the owner of the application, and did we, is this cool or not? Are we good? That's kind of acceptance testing. Fuzzing, there's some fuzzers. The one that's probably the most common is Burp Suite. So if you're looking for a fuzzer, Burp Suite, and hackers are all using these tools too. It's part of, you know, any one of our pen testers tool set is Burp Suite. Black box testing enters random malformed data as inputs. We're trying to get the application to crash. When an application crashes, there's a reason why it crashed. So trying to find out what that reason is to see if it's a buffer overflow. Are we mishandling memory? You know, whatever. Why did it crash? Because that might be a vulnerability. Typically automated, repeated, presenting, whatever. Yeah, it'd have to be automated. I can't imagine doing fuzzing manually. Bleh, enter. Nope. Bleh, enter. Nope. Bleh, enter. That would suck. Misuse case testing, kind of, so misuse case, right? Using, you know, on a login, typing 1,000 A's in, you know, in a login, you know, typing 1,000 A's in for the username, you know, what happens? You know, it's purposely trying to do things that it shouldn't to see how the system, you know, behaves. Test coverage analysis, that'd be analysis of what testing that we're doing that we should be doing and what testing are we not doing that we should be doing. Usually the QA team would do a test coverage analysis. You know, there are parts of the code that we're not testing, you know, all kinds of stuff like that. Interface testing is just that. It's just the interfaces that are exposed, including APIs, ports, services, all that stuff. And then combinatorial testing, all inputs is the goal there. Any questions on any of that? Bam, just like I told you, domain, done. Master, domain 6. Master domain 5, domain 6, bam, domain 7. It's all right there. We're done with that one too now. Administrative security, what's that? This is a good one? So administrative security, not necessarily the same as administrative controls, right? But administrative security, forensics, incident response management, which I get geeky. Incident response, operational, preventative, and detective controls, asset management, continuity of operations, BCP DRP, developing a BCP DRP, backups and availability, DRP testing, training, and awareness, continued BCP DRP maintenance, specific BCP DRP frameworks. A lot of BCP DRP stuff there. Okay, we're going to get into it. I don't know how we're going to get to probably somewhere in incident response. Maybe we'll get that far. So business continuity plan is not the same as a disaster recovery plan. You guys know that? Business continuity plan looks at the business as a whole. It's longer term. Disaster recovery plan is more IT specific, short term. Right? That's one way you can keep them separate from each other. So BCP long-term plan ensure continuity of business operations. Collusion is when 2 or more people are working together to bypass a control. That would be an attack against segregation of duties. So we've segregated something like maybe accounts payable or accounts receivable, right? It's broken up into different people so that no one person can, write a PO, approve the PO, go do right, issue the check and the whole process. So you'd split that up against multiple people. Collusion, if people work together, they can bypass that control. Continuity of operations plan, really kind of more management-y, I think. Disaster, a bad event. Now, one of the things that you don't want to overlook in a disaster recovery plan is specifically defining what is a disaster and who's responsible for declaring it. Those are critical parts in any disaster recovery plan. And a disaster recovery plan itself, short term, recover from a disruptive event, typically IT focused, IT specific on DRPs. Other things that we'll learn about, not tonight, but Tuesday, mean time between failures. So how long can I expect this system to run before it's going to fail? Right? Moving parts are really susceptible to mean time between failures. Nowadays, things are manufactured pretty well, but everything's got a mean time between failure. This laptop, how long does this thing run before it dies? And they do tests on these things, manufacturers. They subject them to, conditions that mimic long-term effects. You see this in cars too, right? Same kind of thing applies. Mean time to repair, how long does it take for me to get a system back up and running? That's just like this one. That's mean time to repair. Mirroring, we've seen mirroring before. That's usually used in like RAID. It's replicating disk data on two separate disks. It's mirroring. What I'm writing here, I'm writing here. Redundant array of inexpensive disks, that's RAID. We're using RAID everywhere. Multiple disk drives to achieve greater data reliability, sometimes greater speed, or both. Striping is spreading data that can be used to rebuild the array across the array would be striping, right? So administrative security, the means to control people's operational access to data. People like to be controlled, I think. So we're controlling people with administrative stuff. Least privilege and minimum necessary access. We've covered this already before. The least privilege, only giving people what they really need to get the job done. Nothing more, nothing less. Also known as the principle of minimum necessary access, discretionary access control. I'm not sure why that's on this slide, but discretionary access control, you can see how that how we would use that to apply least privilege, but it's easy for somebody to violate that because if I'm a user, I can give somebody else privileges. So then there's no kind of centralized minimum necessary access or least privilege. So need to know, need to know is applied always to, not always, but traditionally to mandatory access control. And mandatory access control, we remember what that is, right? That's system enforced. I can't change it. It's policy based. It's all based on clearances and labels. That's mandatory access control. We don't see it in the private sector anywhere. Access determination is based on clearance levels of subjects and classification levels of objects. An extension of principle of least privilege in mandatory access control environments is the concept of compartmentalization. We've also talked about method for enforcing need to know goes beyond the reliance upon clearance level and necessitates simply, whatever, lots of words. But compartmentalization, we talked about those things before, right? Separation of duties, where I do separation of duties and where it should be mandatory is like even user account provisioning. The same are assigning privileges to things. You don't want IT to approve access to things. I shouldn't be the approver and the assigner in most cases. I certainly don't want to be the requester, the approver, and the assigner of access to things. Unless you're CEO. Right? I get access to everything. I got access to your data, no, not yours yet, your data. No, just kidding.
It's always fun in training when we talk about that. We call it the executives for doing that. And you can tell in the room who it is. So everybody looks at them when I say they don't need this. Why do they have it? Well, they feel they do. Everybody looks stewing about it.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have access to next to nothing. I used to, when we first started FRSecure, obviously I had access to everything, right? Now I don't have access to anything,
Limited to at least to read only.
right? But I know where to go to get the answers to the things that I would go and look at or want, you know. That's what an executive, I think, needs. So separation of duties is, just breaking things up. Think of, it's a business process that you're breaking up. The business process, under one control, has the ability to cause you significant damage, break that process up amongst multiple people or entities or something. Collusion is the attack against that, so getting people to work together to undermine the security of the system.
So with collusion, you'll need to know what that separation of duties is, the corrective.
Oh,
control or
right.
Whatever. So let's say, what would you do to prevent collusion?
Okay.
Separation of duties, lie or whatever.
Okay. Yeah, and separation duties and segregation duties are the same thing if you see them. They're interchangeable. But yeah, that's a good point. So separation of duties is a preventative control.
Yeah. I think
Logging
job
would-
rotation, separation of duties.
Yeah, bam.
Look at that, I'm all over it.
You just passed the tests.
Actually, sometimes I know what I'm talking about.
You
It's
do,
rare.
you know, don't say that. All right, so rotation of duties, job rotation, this would be, these are more detective controls, typically. Also known as job rotation and rotation of responsibilities. Now, this whole exam warning thing, obviously we need to take into account some organizations don't have the resources to truly implement this. So look for another mitigating control. But at the end of the day, I always keep in mind that businesses are in business to make money. They're not in business to secure information. So if it's not cost effective to implement this control, then that's not a control that we'll recommend. We'll look for something else. So rotation of duties, job rotation. The principle here is that if I rotate you out and I rotate somebody else in, they will identify something that you were doing wrong. So if you're doing something malicious, the new person coming into the job would be like, the hell is this? Right? That's the principle, that we would identify somebody doing something wrong. It's also kind of a deterrent control, because if I know that I'm going to be rotated on a regular basis, I might be less likely to do bad things knowing that somebody else is coming in next week to do what I do today. So that's the purpose behind rotation of duties and job rotation. Mandatory leave and forced vacation. This is kind of a cool control because, one, it's healthy for your employees, right? If you're not taking vacation, get out here and take some vacation. But it's also, you can identify lack of coverage in your business. So this person's been gone a week and we damn near went out of business, right? We'll fix that. That's a bad thing. Like when every time Kevin goes out of business, we get go-karts. And Kevin tells me I can't ride go-karts anymore. That's we need to find a replacement for Kevin. So I think that's what that means. Or force him on vacations more often. But identifies area where you lack that depth of coverage, that maybe you should have somebody else that's cross-trained to help you there. Can also help discover fraudulent or suspicious behavior, right? You put somebody on leave so that you can conduct an investigation. It's easier to conduct an investigation when they're not here. Yeah, anyway. And it could be a deterrent control too, I suppose, if I know that you're gonna, but I don't think that would work. I mean, I can't see how it would be a deterrent control. Like, yeah, I'm gonna force you to take vacation once a year. Like, sweet. I'm not thinking like, oh crap, that means I won't be able to pilfer money,
So real quick on that, we were looking at buying a bank, and
you and your
not me
wife?
personally.
Okay, I was like,
The
man,
place I work for,
You pay them too much.
I do.
and somebody was on vacation and it was, it's very hush hush when that's happening, right? And I said, oh, we need to figure out how to do this. And they called her and she said, oh, I'll come in and do it. Don't worry. On vacation. And it had been going on for like 15 years. It was a couple $1 million that she'd been embezzling. So it was that vacation. And they got lucky that.
Oh, no, I'll come back and take care of that for you.
Yep, and that raised a ton of flags, obviously, some investigations.
I bet.
I do consulting on the side, and I've had twice now where implementing new systems. screwed up the person who was in charge of the system's little shell game. They didn't know how to port that into the new system.
Wow.
2 times. Wow.
2 different
Crazy.
places, one was a city.
I love people, but people suck, man. Sometimes. All right, non-disclosure agreements. Yeah, this is as effective as it is, I guess. But basically, you're getting people to agree to not tell anything. It's really around confidentiality. Signed by job candidates for their hires. Sometimes we sign one every time, either this or a professional services agreement. Every time we do consulting work. A directive control, legal handles a lot of that stuff. Background checks are, they're almost become mandatory in many places, but it wasn't all that long ago when we had done audits of banks and they weren't doing background checks on people. So background checks, the purpose of a background check obviously is to find evidence that you lack integrity, right? Maybe you are a criminal, maybe you're even wanted. But a lot of that's based on the sensitivity of your job role and what I do for the organization. So if I'm working with money, then I would do, like I don't think we do, for instance, credit checks, right? As consultants here at FRSecure. We don't do that because we don't work with money, right? But if I work with money, if I'm a teller, then I would do credit checks, right? I want to see if you have really bad credit and high debt. Well, it might be an indication that there's at least more, what's the word I'm looking for? Motivation, right? There's more motivation potentially for them. So background checks are really important. The types of background checks you do, all those things, you tie those to job roles and responsibilities. It's also important to do background checks potentially on a regular basis, right? People don't just commit crimes before they come and work for you. They also commit crimes along the way. So as another control, and it's a good deterrent control potentially, but it's also a good detective control. You might be able to identify patterns too, in their, like an employee works for you and they've, this is their second DWI since they've been working for you. You wouldn't have found out about it any other way except for their background checks. Maybe you can help. You know what I mean? That's not a security thing, but that's how we would use it. Try to help them out, step in. And privilege monitoring. So, people that have elevated privileges in the whatever environment, they also pose a heightened risk, right? So increasing training for those people, increasing logging of the activities, knowing that this is a targeted account for a potential attacker, also, lends itself to additional monitoring. So greater scrutiny, more thoughtful controls, job functions with greater security include account creation, modification, deletion, system reboots, data backup, data restoration, so on and so forth. Anything, I've had people debate me, on what is privileged and what's not privileged. And I'm like, it's not the point. I mean, you're missing the point on the true definition. If you have privileges that could cause additional damage or something beyond just normal people, that's privilege, right? Something that's going to cause us harm, or has a higher likelihood of causing us harm. All right, digital forensics. Forensics is a whole nother area of information security. It's a specialized area of information security. It requires specialized tools, specialized knowledge, usually expensive software, expensive tools, byte blockers, and all kinds of drive duplicators and cool stuff like that. But provides a formal approach. Now, the important word there is formal. Every time you go into a digital forensics investigation, assume that it's going to be challenged in court, right? This is going to go legal, is what I say it. So you document every single thing you do in a digital forensics case. If you're going too fast to document everything you're doing, you're going too fast. That's the rule. So everything, I clicked on something. Should I write that down? Sure, right? Because think what opposing counsel is going to do. One, they're going to go after the quality of the evidence, and two, they're going to go after the timeline of, and they're going to look for cracks in all of that to make doubt that this is quality evidence, So chain of custody is really important in evidence collection. Who touched it, who had access to it, who saw it, all those things. So forensics, you really have to treat it very formal. It's very, very formal. So formal approach to dealing with investigations and evidence with special consideration of the legal aspects of the process. And where this usually fits with an incident response is there's really a determination made somewhere along the line in an incident response. Is this going to go legal or not? Or could it potentially go legal or not? Let's start the forensics process along the same lines as the incident response process. Closely related to incident response, but it's not incident response. 99% of our incident responses don't result in forensics investigations. One, they're too expensive, so customers don't want to pay for it. You know, incident response is expensive enough, right? When you're going to get us out of bed, you know, it's like $500 an hour, man. I mean, it's not cheap. Don't have incidents is the point, right? But if it's going to be so in typical incident response, you know, getting from triage to initial investigation is about 16 hours of the work, right? So you can budget $8,000 for an incident response, not a full investigation, an incident response. For forensics investigation, you know, tack on 4 times that maybe, right? So people don't want to go there, and that's good. We kind of don't want you to go there, right? Try to resolve this non-legally if you can. So anyway, forensics is evidence-centric. We're trying to build a case for something or look for something or establish something, timelines, whatever. Typically more closely associated with crimes, while incident response is more dedicated to identifying, containing, and recovering from security incidents. There's nothing legal that says that you have to do a digital forensics investigation on an incident, right? Usually it is assigned to crimes. So if nobody's going to be prosecuting anybody, then don't do it, right? Curiosity is not a good enough reason to spend $40,000, you know, especially when we're going to find out, well, yeah, it was somebody in Russia. You know, what would you like to do from here? You can't, you know, 40 grand, thank you, you know, so.
What about this as part of the root cause analysis to figure out how it happened in the first place? Or?
No, normally you don't want to pay for that either. You know, that would be, normally there's enough indicators in the incident response to tell you what happened, you know, where this came from. So put those controls in place. But to me, root cause analysis is the originator. I mean, like the root cause. That we don't go there.
Always have to get a forensics to know for sure.
No, with 90% certainty, right? I mean, I think some people will take incident response to be 100% certainty, but really when 90-95% certainty is good enough for you to get your business back up and running and doing whatever, that's the goal. Yeah. Because you're in business to make money. You're not in business to chase criminals halfway across the country or halfway across the world. That's not the goal.
Just don't want to repeat the history.
Right. So you need to know enough to identify that, right? So like here's a classic example. Wasn't our incident response, but client, who wasn't a client, now they are, got a ransomware infection, right? And so they, oh crap, restored from backup. They got a ransomware infection. They're like, what the hell? So the third time, right? It took 3 times and they call us. We're like, okay, my first question is, how do you think this keeps happening to you? Do you have any idea? No, we can't figure it out. I go, well, I don't know. There's somehow it gets in, right? So let's look at the perimeter. What could they possibly use to get in? Well, email. Okay, that's one. What else? Well, we got this RDP server. Okay, what is with that? What are you doing with that? Why do you have RDP? You looked at the logs because can you figure out kind of what's happening there? Well, yeah, they did it. They looked through the logs and found out that this system had been completely compromised and was being used to continually infect the rest of their systems. So it was the platform. And I'm like, well, shut down the RDP server and see what happens. You know, so shut down the RDP server, restore from backup. Oh yeah, I think we're good. Yeah, I think so too. That's your incident response, right? You know, I don't know how much it was. Yeah, I don't do the billing. I just know what it costs, right? No, actually, I don't think we billed them in that way because it was just like we could talk through this and like in half an hour figure out. Okay, well, duh. You know, turn that off and just see what happens. If it continues to happen, then yeah, let's establish an incident response. But
some ransomwares are targeting even BDRs through RDP if they can get an RDP, and then they start like Beamer, whoever it was.
Yeah.
You don't even have your backups, and you
Right.
have to pay your ransom.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you really want, yeah, I created, we'll talk later offline, I created an assessment for ransomware readiness. So these are the things that, you know, and if you're not doing these things, this is how it calculates and scores and stuff like that. All right, so digital forensics, prevent unintentional modification of a system. So one of the things you never want to do is conduct a digital forensics investigation on the target system. You don't investigate the thing that you're investigating, you investigate it on a copy of the thing that you're investigating, right? You preserve the original. So anti-forensics makes forensic investigation impossible or difficult. So the way attackers do it now is they don't write anything to disk. That's one anti-forensics potential thing that they could do. Everything's written in memory. So as soon as I come there, the traditional way that we, you know, not we, but people, maybe we'd unplug the system from the computer. Well, as soon as you did that, you wiped memory and every bit of evidence that anything was happening with the system, because it was all running from memory. So anti-forensics, you know, does make forensics more difficult, which again, you could spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars and never ever find that answer, right? And where are you just going to say, look, it's just not going to happen, let's just give up, after you pay us $120,000? You know what I mean? It's just, I hate that. So valuable data is gathered during the live forensics capture. So now there's live forensics. There's, you know, there's kits that we use to capture things happening while they're happening. So I don't shut down the system anymore. That's not the first step in an incident sometimes. You know, and if you want to do this yourself, there's a couple things, right? Look at the running processes, do a net stat, look at the network connections that are running on the system. At least start with those two things, right? And then if you had to unplug the system, then unplug it. At least then we'll know what network connections, who is connected, was an attacker. We can do some research on that stuff. And we got a list of the running processes. Attackers don't hide processes often. You know what I mean? You'll see some evidence there. So anyway, anti-forensics is that. 4 types of data that exist on a drive. Allocated space is the parts of the disk that are marked as actively containing data. Unallocated space are parts that are marked as not having. That doesn't mean they won't have data in them. They're just marked that they don't have data in them. Including memory that never been allocated, so on and so forth. So allocated and unallocated space. You've also got slack space. So depending on how the geometry is, you know, in this case, what is it? Cluster is, let's say cluster's 8 bytes, right? And I've got a file that's 37 bytes, right? It's going to take up 4 sectors and then a little bit more of the next one. What's left over, and then the next file will write in the next sector. It doesn't start with the last file left off. There's that slack space between where this file stopped writing and this file started in the new sector. That's the slack space, right? And you can hide data there. So you have to look in slack space for evidence of bad things that have happened. It's also not uncommon to mark blocks or chunks of or segments of data, sectors of data as bad. So it's marked as bad, yet I can still write to it. And so the attacker would mark that sector as bad, but store their data there, right? So I wouldn't be able to see it through the operating system, but I would be able to see it using forensic tools. I would also be able to see the slack space in forensic tools. I would never see that through the operating system, right? Other things, numerous tools. Yes, lots of tools. So FTK is Forensic Toolkit. That's what that stands for. These are the 2 big dogs in forensics tools, which is important. It's important to use quality tools because, again, consider everything to be challengeable. If I'm using, even though free software seems legit, right? It will be challenged. You know, the legitimacy of the software. Did you change the source code? You know, all those things. So using, you know, FTK or using NCASE. NCASE has stood up to, I mean, that's like the gold standard for forensics. So NCASE the quality of your tool won't be challenged. I want to, whenever you go into forensic investigation, I want as few things as possible being challenged so that we can focus on the facts and the interpretation of the data as opposed to all this other stuff. General phases of forensic process, identification of potential evidence, the acquisition of that evidence. Acquisition might be, a bit level copy of the drive, and then that would be the evidence that I would operate on. Analysis of the evidence, production of a report. Hashing is your friend in forensics, because you need to validate the integrity of the data that you're working with. Yeah, never, not when possible. I don't know when it would not be possible. I just can't imagine using original media for doing a forensics investigation. That'd be reckless. Live forensics. So traditionally we remove power, but now, there are some things we need to do, some tools we need to use. NCASE and FTK both have live forensics capabilities built into them. It's not like, have your tools on a flash drive, plug it into the system to do a live forensics before you power the system off. You have to weigh that against if it's an active attack that's currently happening and it's disrupting business and we're not able to take any orders, well then screw the live forensics. Let's get this, let's make you money again. So one example is from Metasploit. This would be Meterpreter. So Metasploit has tools, it has modules. It's a modular framework for building all kinds of tools. Popular, free, open source exploitation framework. It's one of those things that penetration testers might use, but attackers might use as well. A module is just kind of a reusable piece of code or component that I can use over and over and over again to repeat certain tasks, what have you. A payload is what we would use, what we would send to the target to actually exploit the vulnerability. Meterpreter is one of those tools that can be used. It's very powerful. It's still being used today, even after this book has been written, because it's like so many different hooks and plugins that you can use for Meterpreter. The thing about Meterpreter, the main thing is that it runs all in memory. So if I'm using Meterpreter to attack a system, you reboot the system, you destroyed the evidence. It's not there anymore. So FRSecure, FRSecure, whatever. That's a Microsoft tool. So dumping password hashes with Meterpreter, that's another one of those things you can use with Meterpreter. And then you can also crack passwords and all kinds of things. Features such as command execution of the remote system, uploading, downloading of files, screen capture, key logging, disabling the firewall, disabling antivirus, registry viewing and modification, all things that you can use Meterpreter for. It's not as easy as just like, you'd have to get Meterpreter there, right? You'd have to get it there and you'd have to get it to run. And you can stop all this with like application whitelisting, which would also stop a lot of your ransomware attacks if you ever go that route. Here's just an example. This is dumping hashes with Meterpreter, dumping the registry with Meterpreter. I mean, all these things. I think the important part is know that Meterpreter can be run all from memory and the importance of live forensics. You don't need to know the rest of the stuff about how Meterpreter works, right? You won't get tested on, commands in Meterpreter or anything else like that. It's dumping the registry in Meterpreter. Yeah, and again, remove power, you remove your evidence. That's it. So that's how far we got today. We'll pick up with incident response, which is I love incident response. So that'll be fun. Yeah, it'll be cool. So any questions online? Nope. All right. Anything here? Okay. This is a better Thursday than last Thursday. Last Thursday was dragging butt, man. I'm jacked today though. I don't know what it is. All right. I think you should. Stop video. Oh, I just started again. Mute. All right. So do you close the session?